That for me, I find is the biggest challenge with tech is like, I want to know so much about what my customers want, what pains they have, how they're feeling. And it's difficult. It's so difficult to do that at scale. And especially once you get to, thousands and thousands of, in our case, kitchens using this thing, that it becomes harder and harder to stay personal. But I think in any business, doesn't matter what it is, you have to have some level of like human connectivity. Stoked to have you on, man.
Yeah, man, this is great.
We talked once a long time ago, right?
Yeah, I think on a couple different occasions.
Yeah, and then we got reconnected with our newer investors.
How did that go?
It's good. Yeah, I mean they're great. I mean Vasant has been really great. And now I'm so much more entrenched in the Atlanta scene than I ever have been before because he's very him and Noro are obviously like very Atlanta focused. So they're always introducing me to more people from Atlanta. And I hadn't been back to Atlanta, I think, I don't know, since like I was like 16 or 15 or no, not earlier. I must have been like 13. I used to wrestle in high school and college. And I remember going to like this nationals tournament in Atlanta and on Spirit Airlines. We were pretty poor. And that was like the only time I'd ever been to Atlanta. And that was, I mean, I don't know, that must have been 20 years ago. So it's been a while.
A lot's happened.
It's a great city, man. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. We love it.
We'll talk about it today, but I want to actually start with Rhode Island because I didn't realize you're from Rhode Island, and your parents had a restaurant there. But you were an apprentice baker, is that right?
Yeah. So I grew up, at least for the early part of my childhood, in Rhode Island, and I grew up, running around my dad's restaurant in Pawtucket, which was Archie's Tavern.
Yep.
And my first job was on Federal Hill, the Italian neighborhood there. I did baking and pastries. And
where at?
It's called Rome.
Uh-huh.
Right on Atwells Avenue, like right on the main drive there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of like Italian culture and, Portuguese and Irish and like, that's what I grew up with there. And then moving down south when I was 13 years old was quite the culture shock because we moved out to the burbs of Atlanta too. So a lot more Southern culture in the burbs than there is, in the city. So, even in the city, it's still there, obviously. So it was just a total culture shock. But yeah, great. We're here now many, many years and we love it and built a lot of great businesses here.
So I know a little bit about your dad's restaurant just from reading, but what happened? I mean, I think right around 13, you guys moved down south. So did he close a restaurant? He seemed pretty entrepreneurial?
Yeah. So my dad completely lost everything in Rhode Island. We were, he had a few different businesses, but they all went south right around the same time. Internal and external forces kind of made that happen. And he was basically looking for a fresh start. And so he found Atlanta and actually a suburb of Atlanta, Duluth, as one of the fastest growing cities in the country. I think it was like number 2 or number 3 out of Forbes magazine, and packed us up in a Volvo station wagon, 3 kids, a dog and a cat, and drove down south with not much of a plan. We stayed at a La Quinta Inn for like 3 weeks while he found a job and my mom found a job and found a place to live. And I mean, it was wild.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was not soon after that you guys opened, was it the Roasted Garlic? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that was our original family restaurant. After a couple years of my dad working at supermarkets and hourly labor and my mom as a physical therapist, we opened our first family restaurant with another family in our subdivision, actually. And it was like kind of this 2-family immigrant style restaurant where everybody held positions and super low budget. And that was kind of how we got back into the business as a family in Atlanta. I think the budget for the opening was 40 grand. Like soup to nuts, everything was 40 grand to reopen. It was, a failed restaurant. So not much decor went into it, and went in there and did a real deep clean on the equipment and that was pretty much the end of it. My dad and I were the only line cooks when we opened. So we did all of the cooking as a,
It's nuts.
teenage boy.
I mean, you've been in this since
Yeah.
you were a little kid, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Is your dad still around?
Yeah. He is.
Is he involved at all with the company or?
He and my mom are in our original family restaurant out in Johns Creek, Sugo.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of spend their nights there, even though we do have a general manager and a full management team, as well as a chef and a full chef team there as well. But that's their cheers. That's where everyone knows their name and they know everybody's name. And it's just this amazing restaurant that we built over now 20 years. Although it took a little while to get there. Like that was a big part of I'm skipping over a lot of history, but the biggest challenge for us was, and for my dad, was always really getting past that one unit. My dad and my mom, because as soon as we had the restaurant, my mom quit her physical therapy job and she became the front of house manager, and really the general manager. Ultimately, she's really like the organization that makes the restaurant successful at the end of the day. And my dad has always been like the mind for food and creativity and the guest relationships and that kind of interaction with the team and the guests. And so I saw firsthand how like a one unit successful restaurant was made growing up, and they were able to consistently do that. Like the roasted garlic became very successful after a short period of build up. And then the original Sugo became successful after a short period of buildup. But in both of those instances, when they went to the second unit or the third unit, there was failure. And it was either quick failure or kind of like whole business failure, meaning like the original store went out of business because the new stores were either taking market share away or just the quality decline because of multiple units being operated. And so that's kind of what I graduated college into. I went to Cornell and did the hospitality program there, and then got out, and we were kind of at a really low point. We had expanded through franchise agreements, which obviously is a whole challenging business and a whole different business from restaurants altogether, really. Mm-hmm. And so we did that for a little while, and we had some franchisees, but they all failed or were in the process of failing when I got out of school in 2007. And so that was really my first project. I kind of had this moment where I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to go back to Atlanta and try to salvage what's left of the family business? Or am I going to try to go get a high paying job like all my friends and do banking or consulting or something like that? And, for me, it was just like an obvious choice what to do at that time because, we're very family oriented. I couldn't leave my parents behind. And I also knew that I had a passion for food and beverage and I thought that it was a real interesting opportunity to start and try my hand at like all these business concepts that I wanted to kind of implement into kind of what was a bit of a blank slate. But it was definitely tough because our sales were horrible. We were bouncing checks every week. Year I took over, we had like 40 grand in overdraft fees and, could barely keep staff. And the staff that we did have was not great. And trying to build something on that foundation was really challenging. And the location that I took over had already failed as a franchise, and I reopened it with a 10 grand loan from a customer to get the liquor license. And so when we reopened, everybody in that community already thought we were toast. So reopening with the same name, same kind of menu, there's, not a lot of prospects for success doing that. And so that was really, I think the hardest moment was, kind of getting it from that to even break even or past that was the biggest challenge.
Yeah. And, it seems like originally they were trying to carbon copy the concepts they had. And then you sort of switched the model with just creating a bunch of new concepts. What was the sort of driver or catalyst behind deciding, hey, I'm not going to, create, another Sugo, I'm going to create a whole new brand altogether or a whole new concept?
Yeah, I think at its core, it was about following ideas that I was passionate about and stuff that I wanted to see come to life. So any new restaurant that we've done that has been successful, it's because I have like this deep desire to see something come to life and contribute meaningfully to the dining scene in a neighborhood or a city. And so when it works, that's the magic. I think when I've gotten into trouble is when I've tried to product market fit my way into a restaurant concept in a specific location where you say, hey, this is a great location. It just became available. It's going to be, not very expensive to build out because it was already a restaurant, or, any of the number of reasons that real estate people sell you on a location for a restaurant. And I think when you have one successful restaurant, or even more than one successful restaurant, you start getting a lot of real estate people that are looking to bring you to their spaces. And so you can get very distracted easily by these offers and concepts. And so it's a lot of saying no to what is coming in front of you. And when you're new to that game, you're like, oh, people want me, And so everybody has this desire to be wanted. And so you kind of run down these ideas that really you have no business running down, and you should say no right away. But instead, you kind of get down the road, and then all of a sudden you're like signing a lease or doing a concept or a joint venture, or some hotel deal or some whatever, And so I think that it's something that you have to learn over time. Most people are not able to like have that knowledge ahead of time and exercise it. It's kind of something you have to learn on your own.
I've been there, man, and made and probably made worse mistakes. So
I don't know.
It does actually. It seems like I'm making an inference here just from looking at some of your background, but in addition to just really liking the idea, that family plays a big part in when you decide to do a new concept. I think when your sister graduated from Cornell, that's when you decided to open Iberian Pig, right? And then your brother,
that's right.
when he, when after he graduated from CIA, he opened another concept. But is that like, how much is it family driving you deciding to build what you build?
Well, I think in the very beginning, Stephanie getting out of Cornell was like a critical juncture. Convincing her to join me in the family business.
Was that hard? Was it like a lot of?
I don't think it wasn't that hard. She kind of like, we already had a little bit of momentum going at that time. So she could kind of see that it wasn't a total lost cause. And so things were starting to turn around at that point, like 2009, like I had 2 years under my belt of like turning the business around, and we were starting to see sales grow and profitability grow. And so things were really improving at that time. But I also recognized that we needed to do something new and a little bit bolder. Otherwise, we were going to be, stuck in the suburbs, running these restaurants day to day on meager margins and slow growth over long periods of time, which is definitely one way to run a business. Like you can get there applying the principles of, guest service and quality execution and all that day in and day out. And that is a path to success, but it's a really long, arduous path. The best path to success, obviously, is opening something and it's a massive hit day one and people are just swarming the place. And then you have to manage the operation from there. But like, that's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. And at that time, we hadn't ever done that before. And so that's when I wanted to open Iberian Pig. It gave me the opportunity to do it because Stephanie was general managing the restaurant that I had been GMing for the last 2 years.
Oh, gotcha. So she took over the restaurant you're running so that you could open up Iberian Pig. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Then
John was similarly like he had gotten out of culinary school. He had done some really great stages. He worked for Wiley at WD-50 in New York. And then he went to San Francisco with Michael Mina, and he did, some time in San Sebastian at RSAC. And so he had really built this culinary experience. And that was really our biggest hole in the company thus far. Cause like my sister and I are both kind of like more front of house driven, even though we both worked in kitchens, been line cooks. Yeah. And I love the creative aspect of it and building menus and all of that. But we didn't have anybody in our corner that was really truly a chef. And so we were running the restaurants with kind of more or less kitchen managers at the time. And so we were starting to build that culinary bench, but it really wasn't very deep at that point. And so John came back from San Sebastian and we opened Cooks and Soldiers in 2014. And that was the first time that we kind of had put it all together. Like we had put the chef team together, the dining room execution, the actual build out, like all the build outs we'd done before that were second generation pieced together, really low budget. That was the first one where we like hired architects and designers and built from new construction and made it beautiful and great. And that was also the first time that we had like any critical success, with James Beard nominations, Atlanta Magazine Best New Restaurants, and all of this Eater Restaurant of the Year. Some of the stuff that we got back when we first opened was like great, and the first time we'd ever gotten that kind of recognition.
Yeah. So just to rewind for a second, you sort of glazed over. There's this 2 years that you turned around Sugo. What happened? Like what was happening? That was, I mean, I know there's a million things, I'm sure, but what were the big takeaways of the things that you did that turned the restaurant around? I mean, there's a lot of restaurants, that have a lot of problems.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it was first recognizing like with any problem in a business, like it's incredibly complex, yet really simple. So like the simplicity is you have to increase sales and decrease costs if you want a business to succeed. Okay. So like very simple concepts, right? But incredibly challenging to actually execute on those things. The easiest being cutting costs. That's something you can kind of instantly do and find areas to do. So like my first goal was like stop the bleeding as much as possible. And the bleeding was like, that was killing us was bouncing checks. So I was like, we have to stop bouncing checks. How do we do that? And so reducing our spend, even our personal spend, like every dollar we spend on the personal side is theoretically $10 of sales. Like on a 10% margin in a restaurant, like for every dollar we spend personally, it's got to be $10 in sales. And that wouldn't even be true because we weren't making money at the time. But if you apply that concept, you're like, okay, well, going out to eat is $1,000 of sales. So like, are we getting that $1,000 or not? And so we had to go on the austerity plan. Like,
but how did you so you did that with your family? I'm assuming. How did that work?
Not great. There was some growing pains in the beginning when I'm like, guys, we got to eat our meals at the restaurant. We can't be going to Starbucks. We got to be drinking coffee that we're buying at wholesale and things like that. So I was just trying to really control the things we could control in the very beginning, and then trying to manage costs in the restaurant. But you can't cut your costs to a successful business. Like that's just one very small piece of the turnaround effort. And for me, it was like, as the owner GM, like I couldn't be the chef. I couldn't be the bartender. I couldn't be the server. Like I needed to oversee all of those things. And so if you're in a turnaround effort, you need to be overseeing the whole thing. And so you can't just be like, I'm going to be the chef and crush the menu, but like what's happening out there, I'm not doing it. I can't really see or know what's going on. So it's like I knew that I had to be at that position in order to make the turnaround effort happen. And then from there, it was really about this like control what we can control every night, which is how each guest experience is going. And so I would personally make it my goal every single night to develop a relationship with each guest and each table that came through the dining room. So I would work the floor and make sure their experience was great. If it wasn't great, we'd fix problems. If it was great, we'd like develop those relationships, get to know people by name. Like that's where our mission statement of passionately pursuing the perfect dining experience, one guest at a time, came from. It's like that one like micro unit of something you can control that leads to ultimately a successful outcome on the aggregate. And so for us, like when we've got 6 covers, like you better believe all 6 of those people are going to be happy. And then you build on that. But it does take time, and, 2 years definitely seems like a short period of time, but like day in and day out, 6 days a week, open to close, have less money at the end of the day than you did when you started. That grinds on people. Most people aren't going to make it through 2 years of that.
Yeah.
And so it is about trying to put a smile on your face when things are not going well and grind through it and, have this attitude of abundance with the guests. So that, I think that was really like the bigger picture. So it's like control the cost, and then control what we can in the guest experience, and making sure those each individual guests leave happy, and then we can build on that.
Yeah, I love that, man. You know, I heard this. You know, I guess it's your core value or whatever. That, you know, pursue the perfect dining experience one guest at a time. I never heard it through the lens of the story you just told. It's amazing, man. It's also like I mean I'm sure your team does know that, but like hearing that story and then seeing that value is such a strong sort of motivator for your team.
Thank you.
So you eventually, I'm going to jump around a bit because I'm kind of curious about how this sushi thing happened, because you know you went from, I mean, I understand that it's pretty linear. I could see Italian, okay, and then you go Spanish. Those make sense.
And then Basque, which is like Spanish and French.
Yeah, Basque, makes sense. And then I mean, you tapped an incredible chef. He came from Shuko, which by the way is like one of the best. You know, if you go to New York, you have to eat at Shuko. It's incredible, and I think you did Suzumi as well. Like, how did that happen? What was the genesis of the sushi spot? Also, I've never worked in a sushi restaurant. I have to imagine it's so different from, you know, like a standard sort of full service restaurant. What are the big differences?
Yeah. Well, so like any of our good ideas, it started with like a passion around this product and experience. And I had gone to Japan, I guess it was like 12 years ago now, for the first time. It's like an eye-opening experience. I think a lot of people talk about Japan as like this incredible kind of paradigm shift experience, but I do think there is something to that, not just from a food perspective, but just like culturally. Like, I think every American should experience Japanese culture in Japan, because it exposes you to this concept that like two things that are different and opposite can be true and great at the same time. Like, American culture is, you know, undeniably great and successful in its own right. And Japanese culture is undeniably great and successful in its own right. Yet they could not be more opposite. Like, on almost every regard, you know? And so going there and seeing that and getting to feel that culture and see it in restaurants and the hospitality that they deliver and the experience, was just like mind blowing. And so I was able to eat at, Tsukiyobashi Jiro, which is the Jiro Dreams of Sushi documentary they made about him, that kind of like popularized sushi globally in a lot of ways, and popularized that omakase experience. You know, even in New York, it's kind of like the genesis of all of the spots in New York. And so I left that kind of like changed, and also just wanting to experience fine dining like that elsewhere, because to me, I had been burnt out on these 40-course meals, thousands of ingredients. You eat and drink your way into like a coma, stupor, and at the end, you just like don't feel that great, and the next morning you feel even worse. And so after my experience in Japan, I just like felt great all the time. And like that experience of the, you know, the sushi omakase with most of the meal being two ingredients, the beverage pairings and the way they play with like temperatures, and just was this amazing euphoric kind of experience at the end that I had never kind of gotten from fine dining before. So that kind of led me on a path of just my wife and I going to these places when we traveled. And that's how we got to the sushi counter at Shuko and met Jordan. And, you know, and instantly I'm like, what is this guy doing at one of the best sushi restaurants in New York? You know, a white guy from Kentucky. And, but, you know, I quickly like realized like his depth of knowledge and his talent level. And we just kind of became friends. Like, we hit it off. And so, had no real idea to ever open a restaurant like that. I really thought it was just outside of our abilities, honestly. It wasn't like I completely had written it off, because we had talked about doing a pop-up in Atlanta, and I was going to, you know, kind of test the waters a little bit with it to see if there was demand. And so we had scheduled a pop-up for April 2020, and obviously March 2020 hits and we're like, oh man. But pretty quickly our company, we, you know, because we had been through these tough times before, and I knew what it was like managing businesses with not a lot of sales, or, you know, in the red, I was like, well, you know, we can figure this out. We built, you know, 6 successful businesses, and we're in a strong, you know, position financially so that we could weather a downturn. So I was like, you know, we'll kind of take this one day at a time. And, we did the COVID pivot instantly. We didn't like close for a single day at any of the restaurants, and
Wow.
pivoted to takeout immediately. And so then that opened our eyes to the new business and the new reality of what was happening. That's when I was like, hey, we should do the takeout pop up. There's still demand for the high end in the takeout experience. And I think we could do something special. And so he came down and stayed at a friend of mine's hotel cut us a deal for $20 a night. So he was living in a hotel for $20 a night,
For how
45
long?
minutes outside the city for like 7 months.
What?
So he came down and we did launch the pop-up in May of 2020 and he never left. Like
That's
literally
nuts.
stayed at this hotel for 7 months, drove my mom's Toyota Camry to work every day. And we launched the pop-up, and then the demand was just overwhelming. And also the quality was incredible. Like out of the Omakase box that he created, like I tasted it for the first time and it was truly world-class, like amongst the best I'd experienced anywhere in the world in a to-go format. So that's also when I knew that he was the real deal, because up until that point, when you meet somebody at a restaurant or it's a sous chef or a chef de cuisine or something like that, you never know if they're actually the person driving what's happening in that business. And so he definitely was at that level, and it was something that I was not prepared for. And so then when I knew that quality level was there, I was like, we can build a business around this. And so that's when I signed the lease in July of 2020 and got started on the build out, which was a total epic challenge, especially during that time, getting anything done and built and open was just absolute misery. And we did finally open in February of 2022. And it was just like an avalanche of like guests kind of like demand for that concept in Atlanta, because we were the first only omakase restaurant like you see the sushi as in Japan and New York and places like that in Atlanta. Of course, there were other restaurants doing omakase inside a larger footprint where they also have a la carte. But in order to do sushi at the highest level, it truly has to be in that format of omakase for a variety of different reasons. But that was kind of the first of its kind in Atlanta. And then we really saw, just an incredible outpouring of support for the opening. So
Amazing.
it was, we were working friends and family, and like the press releases went out, they all got picked up, and it was like within hours we were booked out for 3 months. It was nuts.
It's crazy. Do you go back to Japan often? Or?
I try to. I was there in February, actually.
By the way, do you have 4 kids?
I do have 4 kids.
That's nuts. None of this makes sense, knowing that you have 4 kids. Did you my thought when you were telling me about going to Japan, I was like, did you bring the kids with? Because we've been talking about taking our kids to Japan. I'm like, I don't even know how that works.
Yeah, I mean, certainly no. We're not taking 4 kids to Japan, not until they're all old enough to deal with their own bathroom situations and pack their own bags and get dressed. Otherwise, no, there's no chance.
You leave them with family and you go.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah. But my wife and I are same team, and we both work in the business and we both work at home. So there's not a whole lot of rest going on in our lives, but like we both are like supporting each other in these big efforts, and so she's our director of marketing, which is like one of the most important roles because sales are the lifeblood of every business. And so she and I are really focused on that, and also just like big picture growth and what we're doing. And so we're intimately working together in that regard. And then on the family front, we're both tackling a lot of the big responsibilities there too, where, she's like the home CEO, I'm the work CEO. And then we're both like the top lieutenant in both situations and kind of defer to the other person when it comes to the big decisions. So that's kind of how we make it work for our life. But like, yeah, it's certainly a challenging season of life.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
8, 5, 3, and 1.
I'm trying to process that. We have 2 and I'm done.
Yeah.
2's enough.
Yeah. I mean, I do say that like, it doesn't matter how many kids you have, they're going to fill every nook and cranny of your life if you let that happen. And so, it is, everyone, it doesn't matter, 1 kid, 2 kids, whatever it is, it's going to fill the whole box. So you have to be aware of that.
We have a similar story. I'm sure we have a bunch that I think one of the restaurants you opened, you pay the GC and then you kind of walked with some cash. and didn't do the
Mm-hmm.
work.
The
I think it's
original Iberian Pig.
probably happened to a lot of us. When you're like I'm sure it happens hopefully less often over time, but when you're feeling stuck, like you don't know what to do, like do you have anything that you do to try to get centered or like ground yourself when you're in a tough situation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I discovered like a little over a decade ago yoga, and that's been like my primary working out activity that I've built into my schedule over many years. And when I've stopped doing it, it's when my life kind of falls apart. And so that is like a core thing that I do, that I try to build in and schedule everything else around that. So it keeps my head clear. But like, I do get into these like negative headspaces and kind of get really worked up on certain issues or things and what I found is like action is the best antidote to any problem. Like, and anxiety. Like you can kill your anxiety really effectively with action. And so, obviously the correct action is the best thing for it, you know? And so applying whatever that next best correct action is, I think is the way that I approach it. But like, if I'm really worked up about something, it's usually because I'm stewing on it and I haven't really taken that step to correct this problem or do something positive in the direction that
Yeah.
needs to be taken.
You know, it's so funny. By the way, I'm the same exact way, and I haven't had a personal therapist in a while, but we have a couples therapist, and she always says to me, she's like, are you sure that you just don't work all the time to like cure your anxiety? And I'm like, yeah, maybe
Yeah.
that's what it is.
No, definitely.
And I think that's actually like part of what maybe the lifeblood of being an entrepreneur is that it is so true. You know, yes, action, like also just going and exercising, doing a workout, you always feel much better. But also just like, doing a new initiative or improving something in your business or starting another business or each of these things, like or the idea of it that you drive towards, it helps so much in curing, the comparison issues or anxieties and things like that. I don't know if that's a good thing, but it definitely seems like a common theme with entrepreneurs where we're always doing more.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine part of it is probably just like, to quell a lot of that anxiety.
For sure.
Is your wife also kind of have that entrepreneurial drive, or is she just sort of along the ride?
Yeah. Yeah, she definitely does.
Yeah, that's
Big
good.
time.
That's important, for you both to be aligned in kind of how you
Big
think,
time.
because especially in the restaurant business, man, because if you don't at least understand, it's a very difficult way to sort of like live with someone if they're in the restaurant business and you're not,
Yeah, I mean it's super challenging, and I'm even starting to get it from my kids now where they're like upset when dad has to go to work at night and that kind of thing. So it definitely is a challenging business, but I will say, every job has its challenges. And so nothing that you pursue in life is going to be the perfect thing. I don't care what it is, what profession you think is the most glamorous, best, or easiest. Like there are elements of it that are not going to be tasteful. And so you just have to accept that and then work to build a life around it that you're happy with. And, if there are elements of it that are not deal breakers, then of course, but like we're in a season of life where family is a big part of what we do every day, and I have to figure out how to make that mesh with the restaurant, demands. And so that's about like picking my spots. Where can I be most impactful? How can I create the most impact in the business, but also be there for the early years of my kids' lives that are fleeting. And then I know that the business will be there, when those years are over, and I'll have even more time to dedicate towards that. So for right now, it's about dialing in growth and making sure that growth fits within the broader picture of our family. And so that's, how many restaurants do we want to open, at what cadence, the cash that it requires and the, financing that it requires to make a new restaurant happen, and the team. And I think there's a right pace in which we do all of these activities such that it brings a lot of energy to the team, where there's new opportunities for people for growth, because we are growing, but it also doesn't tax the resources of the business too much financially, and also our time, so we can really focus on doing one new thing right and well at a time, and also have time to do these other things that we want to do with our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I also find that my kids force way better prioritization for myself. I have less time. When you just have less time when you have kids, there's no way around that. And you're forced to decide how you spend that time. And I love the sort of premise of Parkinson's law. You fill the space that you have. It's surprising how much you can get done when you're forced to prioritize what not to do. And I couldn't agree more, man. Especially, you could look at it like, fuck, man, I don't have enough time anymore. Like, if these people can do more because they don't have kids or they have this. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially in your business, though. I mean, tech startups. You kind of have this unlimited amount of time out there to do things. Cause like in our business, we're going to open and close the doors every day. Like, and the lights come on and it's 5 o'clock and then we're going to close it and then we're going to do it the next day. But like in your world, you could theoretically like work 24 hours straight on a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually sleep at some time, but there's no governor where it's like the last order hit the kitchen and we're done for the day, and like, obviously as you transition into knowledge work and restaurant business, like that can change and you could theoretically be working on these problems for extended periods of time. But I also think what you do is so challenging because, my competitive set is like whatever neighborhood I'm in, or city I'm in, depending on how you quantify the type of concept and the customer base and all of that. But like, with a tech startup, it's global. Like your competitors are global. Like somebody could come along and create a better version of what you're doing any day and make your entire business obsolete. Like that comes with a pressure and a stress, that is like almost unlike any other business. And then you also have investor expectations on top of that and the challenges of kind of growing a business through all of those levels of investor expectations, like incredibly challenging.
Yeah, it's certainly a very different. Well, it's a very different business approach altogether. I mean, running restaurants are very difficult, but it's also very quantifiable, right? There's a P&L, there's OpEx, and there's
we're
prime
trying
costs.
to have profit at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And when profit isn't the first thing, although it should ultimately, unit economics should be important for any business, but when growth is the goal, it does make it hard to understand the guardrails and kind of where you should spend your time, where you shouldn't. And yeah, you have a very different dynamic with investors and customers and employees. I think for me, the biggest challenge I find is, in the restaurants, I could always, to your point, I could always walk to a table and be like, how you doing? How's this? And right away hear feedback. And I knew no matter what, because you could see them eating it, like whether they like it or not, or whether the service they're getting is, whether they're happy, right?
Yeah.
In tech, it's very difficult, because one, it's not a surface level. Sometimes people don't understand what problem they need to solve or how they need to solve it, or how to sort of express what will help them. And it's also very hard to get in front of them because everything is remote or asynchronous. That for me, I find is the biggest challenge with tech is like, I want to know so much about what my customers want, what pains they have, how they're feeling. And it's difficult. It's so difficult to do that at scale. And especially once you get to, thousands and thousands of, in our case, kitchens using this thing, that it becomes harder and harder to stay personal. But I think in any business, doesn't matter what it is, you have to have some level of like human connectivity.
For sure. And how do we measure that, like guest satisfaction at the end of the day? It's like, it's the most important driver of every business. And so how do we know if we're doing a good job or not? Like that is, I think every business should have a way to answer that, or at least try to answer it with some degree of certainty.
Yeah. If you were going to double the size of your business tomorrow, what would you focus on most?
Well, I definitely wouldn't do that because I have no interest in doubling the size of our business tomorrow. I think that restaurants specifically are really hard businesses to scale because we're dealing with like individual emotional connections that guests are making to our business and our staff is making with our guests and the kitchen and the food. And it's just a complex operation. And so, and it's also highly competitive. So when you start slipping, like customers know right away and they go other places, and other restaurants are constantly trying to be better and execute at a higher level. And so it's just one of those businesses, like you have to be on your A game in order to succeed long term, and nothing will throw you off the A game more than adding a bunch of units where you're now pulling your managers and stretching them thinner, and you're hiring people off the street that have never worked with you before and have no basis in your cultural values. And so they're bringing their own expertise to your business that may be totally different than the way that you like to run things, or the values are completely different. And so, and there's no one there to make sure that that person knows that or is trained in that way, because they're on to the fourth or fifth opening of the year. So I think the only way that I've seen at the high end, like nice restaurants, is to do it gradually. And then there are great examples of companies that have done it really successfully pretty quickly. But what they do is they gradually build up to that.
Yeah.
They gradually like build up to, okay, we feel great about doing one opening a year. Now we're going to try to do 2 openings a year. And then that works. Now we're going to try to do 3 openings. Okay. That didn't work. Now we might be doing just 2. And so, there's just very few examples of really fast growth in our industry. I think that it also has to do with the concept. Like whenever you've seen really fast growth be successful, it's usually a tremendously unique product, something that really has a differentiating factor that is changing the game in some way. Like the last one that I can even really think of off the top of my head is like Starbucks. Like Starbucks changed the game on coffee, like in America. And so they had a very unique product, and it was a status symbol to be like carrying around a Starbucks cup back in the day. And now they've reached a scale, and now the business is on the other side of that, where it's declined because of just that tremendous amount of growth, and it's now ubiquitous and not cool. And so I think every brand struggles with how to grow, even at the biggest scale, like a Starbucks or something like that. I think a good example is like Shake Shack, like how did they grow and scale to where they're at? And I do think that they're also a great brand out of New York that like had this zeitgeist and all of that. But then now as they've tried to ramp up that growth even further, and as a public company, what does that experience look like? I've had really consistent meals actually with them, but I can also just see the volume maybe not quite where it used to be. And I think that also has to do with speed of growth. So we want to keep that excitement around new concept and new brand openings and duplications. So we did Nashville, and we created a tremendous amount of buzz and energy around that opening, and it was awesome. So now we're going to try to do it in Charlotte next year. So we opened Nashville in 2023. We're not going to get Charlotte open until 2026. So it's like a good kind of window into how quickly we want to do things, such that we can preserve that excitement around a brand entering a city or a new location or a new neighborhood. So that's really the way I think about it.
You obviously already have a lot of scale. You have Mujo, Cooks and Soldiers, Iberian Pig, Sugo, Double Zero. I'm curious. These are all fairly disparate concepts. Are there guardrails or parameters you put in place so that your team can have autonomy with creating menu items and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely want to create, I think like the best businesses operate in these environments where there's creativity within a framework. So you kind of, as ownership, leadership, you give the framework, the guardrails of like, this is generally like the values that we want to see kind of espoused in the business. And then you have creativity around how to accomplish this goal, even setting goals with those values in mind. So we definitely do allow for that in the businesses in a variety of different ways, culinary, obviously.
What does that look like? Like you are tasting today for Double Zero.
Yeah. Like,
what
so
are the
from a
parameters
culinary
there?
perspective, we try to identify like, what's this brand, and like, what's the promise of that brand? Like from the guest perspective, like, what do we want to be? Like for Double Zero, we want to be a great neighborhood Italian restaurant. Like we're not trying to be like the best pasta restaurant in Atlanta, where we're making all of our own pastas. We're not trying to be the best Neapolitan pizza restaurant in Atlanta. we're trying to be a great neighborhood Italian restaurant for that neighborhood that we're in. So what does that look like? And so then the chefs get to create around that. And so what do dishes look like what's a great version of a dish in a neighborhood Italian restaurant for a seasonal summer vegetable dish or a seasonal summer salad or something like that. So that's kind of how that plays out. And then we'll give them kind of unlimited creativity on specials, like run specials and try stuff. And then when it comes time for the menu and we'll do a seasonal change, we all sit down and we do a round of tastings. So we're even trying to fine tune that process now, where there's a tasting before the tasting that I'm at, where John, who's the culinary director, and my brother for all the European concepts, and then Jordan does all the Japanese stuff. He's working with the chefs to like workshop and develop these ideas, and then do one tasting where they can all sit and like kind of rip each other's ideas to shreds, and then bring that to me and John in a second tasting, so that there's there's kind of this creative safety in like a meeting where they can all critique each other and try to create the best ideas, versus when the dishes come to me for tasting, there's like less of, there's just more of a desire for it to be good. And when it's not, like, it feels like a personal critique. And so finding the right balance there, so that we get at the end the right product. And, this is what I told my brother, is like, the guest and the customer in any business, like, really doesn't give a shit about our feelings. Like, and in these meetings, like, we are making sure the work environment is good and positive. And so we are tiptoeing around it a little bit because we don't want to just destroy someone's, ego. But at the same time, guest doesn't care about that. So at the end of the day, we have to do the absolute best work that we can possibly put out. That's ultimately the challenge.
Yeah. How do you guys collect feedback from guests?
So we're trying to collect even more feedback. So we have Open Table or Resi. So we want to have the most verified feedback. So like, we're kind of kicking out any review source that has nothing to do with the actual guests who sat in the business. Like, anybody can write a Yelp review. Almost anybody can write a Google review. But we want to know this person verified was in the restaurant. So Open Table and Resi have that. And then our mobile payments provider, Sunday, has that. And so we are collecting all of this review data. And then we are bonusing on that review data across the whole company.
That's cool.
And so our top bonus metric is the customer satisfaction score. So we don't bonus people on sales anymore. We only bonus on guest satisfaction and cost management. Because to me, long term, I think that's how the business is most healthy, is to say, hey, we want the best possible guest experience, and we also need to make money, so you have to control your costs. So if we do those two things really, really well, I think long term, we're always going to be in a positive situation. And so that's kind of how we approach the, incentivization of our management team. And specifically when it comes to the guest review score, we've even kind of rolled out another element to this. Is we kind of did a benchmarking of all of the restaurants on Open Table and Resi to see like what was the, kind of top scores, and where did kind of people, on the scale of very successful to about to go out of business, where do people stand? And so what we found is that, like, an average solid restaurant is like a 4.7, and that like great restaurants are typically 4.8, and then very few, if none, are like 4.9. And so we basically said we want our base standard to be 4.8. And so if you hit 4.8, you get bonus. If you hit 4.9 and you become like one of the top like 5 places in a given city, we'll bonus even on that too. So like it's a variable kind of on top of that. And so it just kind of gets everybody focused on what I think is the most important thing at the end of the day, which is the guest satisfaction, the experience from a objective perspective. What is like the aggregate? Like, I don't care what one dude says on Yelp or Open Table. If somebody says nasty things about us somewhere, like, I could care less. What I want to see is like, what's the aggregate say about us? What is over thousands of impressions? What are people saying? Is it overall at a level that's positive enough to put us amongst the best in our city or neighborhood? And that's what we're trying to achieve.
It's really smart. It's a great measure of success for the teams. What do you love about the Atlanta food scene?
Well, Atlanta has grown so much since like even we started doing this. I think from 2009 until now, there's just been this tremendous growth of all these awesome places. And, Atlanta had pretty decent food scene before that, but like there's just like been just this incredible growth. And, Michelin Guide coming to Atlanta 2 years ago, also great for the city, great for fine dining, great for the growth of that top level, but also for the tier below that too, that allows for all these chefs to find homes in different places after getting training at some of the top spots. So I'm generally a big believer that the system is great on an overall basis. And, you know, Atlanta has just like continues to evolve and grow. I think right now, because of Atlanta is also a very challenging market. I think for a lot of people that come to Atlanta, they can be disappointed in sales and what they do here because they kind of misjudge it a little bit. So Atlanta is a big city. It's one of the largest MSAs in the country. It's like top 10. But then if you actually do the nitty gritty work, it's like really a patchwork collection of a lot of different neighborhoods. And so in order to be successful here, you first have to be a great neighborhood restaurant. Like that is what you have to be at the end of the day. And so a lot of people coming in thinking they're going to, dominate and do, 8-10 million a year in sales. And that's just not the market. The market is like create a great business in a neighborhood on, 3 to 5 million in sales, maybe a little bit more, and build your business model around that. And so I think that's where people get, into a tricky spot. It's also why like a lot of New York restaurants that try to go other places, there's so few places like New York in the country. Like, okay, maybe you can open a Chicago store, maybe you can open LA. Like there's just not that many spots where, I have a friend that works for one of the big restaurant groups out of New York, and they're looking for new places to put restaurants, and they're thinking about Nashville, and because we're in Nashville, but they're, these glitzy $8 to $12 million a year New York City restaurants. And there's really nowhere to go in the United States where you can plop one of those things down and expect that to happen. Like maybe Miami, maybe Vegas, like maybe LA, like we're talking a very, very short list of places. So our model is like, I want to create a really sustainable business for 30 years minimum. And so that means taking a little bit less space, making sure we have just the right number of seats so that we can make a really good living when times are good. Maybe we leave some of the upside on the table in those early years when we're the hottest restaurant in town. But then as you get into that awkward teenager phase of being a restaurant, years 6, 7, 8, 9 through 15, whatever that is, before you become a classic, those years can be tough. And so I want just enough space that I can ride out those leaner years and be profitable and successful on just the right number of seats that I need in order to do that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It was like a 15-20 minute drive to get kind of anywhere in Atlanta, I noticed.
Yeah.
From where I was staying.
Yeah.
So that makes a ton of sense of these pockets of areas. And then they're sort of condensed when you get into that area. All right. So if you were gonna, let's just say you breakfast, lunch, dinner in Atlanta, and you were not going to go to one of your restaurants, but you're going to eat breakfast out, lunch out, dinner out, where would you go?
Oh, that's great. All right. So breakfast is Daily Chew. It's a excellent kind of South African Israeli food. The owner, Julia, is fantastic, and all their products are super clean and fresh and delicious. I probably would save them for lunch too, but I would say, I don't know, for a lunch, like sit down lunch is really hard to come by in Atlanta. And I probably say like for sit down lunch, Rumi's Kitchen is excellent. Just like good Mediterranean food, clean, great shareable. So that would be my lunch spot. And dinner, this is probably the tough one. So I mean, I feel like I have a lot of choices for dinner, but if
You can pick two if you want. Maybe you can give it a
yeah,
little bang
yeah.
bang.
So like, I think from a steak experience, if I want to ball out, like Marcel, Ford Fries Steakhouse is killer. I feel like I find myself like with guy friends, like that's our kind of like go-to default Atlanta spot. I think that If I'm thinking Italian, my default is either like, if I want like more of a casual neighborhood spot, it's Bocalupo. If I want something a little bit more elevated, from like a design and environment perspective, and really great pasta, I think Lila is my go-to on the Italian side of things. As far as kind of cool little neighborhood type spots, like I really what's the name of the little wine bar that is amazing? Lucian in Buckhead is just like an amazing designed restaurant, beautiful, the food's always consistent, and the wine list is the best in Atlanta probably. So anyway, those
All
are
right, we got some good
probably,
spots there.
yeah.
Where did I eat last time I went there? I had dinner at Deer and the Dove. Is that what it's
Oh
called?
yeah, yeah, in Decatur
That's
Square.
great.
We're like four doors down with with the original Iberian.
It's really good. Really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's crazy. I haven't been. I need to go. It's high on my list. But
Yeah.
4 kids, like we don't get out often. So
Dude, I go out to dinner like once a year down. Not once a year, but like maybe 3-4 times a year.
I go out
in
more
in the city,
in other cities. Like when I'm traveling,
Yes.
I'm
Yeah,
able
me
to
too.
dine out and see
Yeah.
what's going on in other cities. But it's challenging in my
me too.
hometown.
This is great, man. I'm so stoked we got to make some time for this.
I know. I'm happy we did it.
Yeah. I know you got
Congrats
busy.
on all your success. What you guys have done is amazing. You've
I
taken on
appreciate it.
like an incredibly hard, difficult, challenging piece of the business. But I also think that's also where value is unlocked. Like when you take on these really hard, challenging problems, there's a reason no one's been successful doing it yet, because it's hard. And what you guys, the piece that you took on was very challenging. Seen a lot of startups in the graveyard of that space. And so congrats on you guys being the one to able to get out of that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's funny. I think the thing that excited me the most about it, but also was the most daunting, was specifically in like the recipe space. There was not a lot of people doing it, a very challenging problem to solve, and also not obvious to anyone, including investors. That it is a problem, because it seems so innocuous is the wrong word, but everybody thinks of recipes and they think of Food Network, but I think that was the biggest challenge, but also what makes it so fun, right? Is that
I remember one of the first projects I tried to tackle out of college was just like, how do we figure out what our theoretical food cost is, and how do we figure out like what our actual food cost is? And we're running out of QuickBooks and manually writing checks. Like, the amount of data and like individual transactions here is just like so vast. To try to marry those two things together is like nearly impossible.
Yeah. The original idea for meez was I just wanted a badass recipe tool. Like, I come from the kitchen, cook. I want this like really cool, dynamic, like interactive thing. And then before I launched meez, I ran this large restaurant group. We had 6 or 7 different brands. And I don't even think I knew what the word theoretical food cost meant at that time. Then I learned, and I started interacting with all these other systems and having to roll them out and then looping in parts of what we were building with meez. And I remember the day we got all the theoretical costs of all of our menus in one place. And we built this tool that now is in meez, where you could, hypothetically change the sell price of something or the recipe, and we ended up saving like $600,000. I mean, this restaurant group, there's like 100 something, it's huge. But it was like, oh my God, okay, we need to build this into the app. That was that part of the app originally. It was really, we quickly built that in. I was like, okay, we had to figure out how to make that easy, because it's insane how, one, most people don't know what the theoretical food cost is. 2, once you do learn it, if you can actually get it, the delta between your theoretical and actual is way higher than you think. And you might be excited because you have a 22% food cost, but it turns out you
really could have 15.
Yeah, and it happens all the time. So, anyways, this was great, man. I'm so stoked, and I'll be down in Atlanta again soon. We're going to do an event there, actually, like a little party. We're going to a couple different cities and doing some parties. So I'll keep you posted on that. But
that's awesome.
Glad we found some time.
Yeah, man, this was great. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.